Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, August 6th, 2025, episode 457. And we're going to talk about Somaliland versus the redistricting in the United States. But before we get to that, just a little bit of news and update perspective, as it were. Professor Gilbert Doctorow, I think he teaches in Russia, but he's from the United States, I'm guessing. He's a frequent guest on Judge Napolitano's podcast, Judging Freedom. And the title of the podcast that I'm referring to is Professor Gilbert Doctorow, is Moscow optimistic? And they had a conversation. Basically, the judges was asking him how people in Russia feel and how they react to the recent news, particularly what Trump had said regarding the nuclear submarines moving to closer to Russia. And he said a couple of things which I think we all know already, but it was really good for him to say it out loud. And that is, it doesn't matter if you move the submarines closer or not, whether they are already on station or not. It doesn't matter because the range of the missiles that are on the submarines, well, they can hit Russia even when they're in port, right? When they're not in the ocean somewhere hiding close to Russia. So it doesn't matter how the proximity of the submarines, their missiles can hit Russia from anywhere. I thought that was kind of, well, yeah, of course, should so it's just basically a visual, an optic, propaganda, if you will. Now, the Russians know America really well, and I think that, this is Dr. Rowe speaking, that probably their understanding is more nuanced than people here in the United States, and so they know that the verbal attacks that Trump and other people are vocalizing, well, that's what they say. What matters is what happens on the ground when you really, where the rubber meets the road, as it were. And so apparently Witkoff had finished a meeting, a 3-hour meeting with people from Russia. And so there's on the one hand, all of this, aggressive militant dialogue in public, and then there's something else that's happening in private. And this is a very big difference between the Biden administration, which would sort of say that they're doing everything they can and then do nothing behind the scenes, right? So there is that perspective. I still wish that Trump would just rip the Band-Aid off if he still is in that mindset. I don't know. Just the things that he says is just so ridiculous and over the top. Um, just it really bothers me. So it's nice to know that the actual effect of what's happening on the ground, particularly important places like Russia, is flies in the face of the things that Trump says. It comforts me. Okay, just wanted to share that. Now let's go to Somaliland. Now Somaliland, yes, it's right next to Somalia, where the Somali pirates and all of that stuff, even Black Hawk Down, the movie made soon after the Clinton administration botched an operation going on over there. But in any case, Somaliland, if you look at the Horn of Africa, that is that little, if you look at the continent of Africa, on the right side, especially right near one of the gulfs, there's a little horn. It looks like a little spike that sticks out from Africa, and they call that the Horn of Africa. And that horn is Somalia. However, the left side of that horn is Somaliland. Okay. And so some of this information I'm getting from Miriam Awaba on Somaliland's bid for recognition, I-24 News, which was posted a day ago. And so, she's sort of on the ground and kind of, more establishment type reporter. But Somaliland has been trying to get recognition as a nation for a while now. But now they believe they have a bargaining chip, a couple bargaining chips, and they're waving it in front of America, hoping that they will bite. That way, they get recognition as a independent state. So Somaliland broke away from Somalia, and more on that in a moment. But they can't necessarily be a official nation without recognition from other nations. You see, this is the weird uh, phenomena that you see in global politics, right? So the people who live in that area want to be recognized as an independent nation. However, if other countries, aka that is to say, other governments, don't recognize you, then you don't actually exist. So what they are going to try to leverage, what they're going to try to use as leverage, is the rare earth materials in Somaliland, and they're offering a place to build a naval base. That way they can attack Houthis easy, easy, easy. It'll make it easier to attack people in the Middle East if they have a base on Somaliland, which, on the one hand, you're kind of like, now, why would you do that? I mean, are you that desperate uh, for recognition that you will put the future of your entire country at risk, right? Because that essentially is what happens. As soon as you invite Americans into your property, just know that you are no longer your own independent country, right? The United States will meddle and interfere with pretty much everything, or at least they're going to try. And if part of the offer is, I'll build a naval base, that way it's easier for you to attack like people like the Houthis easier. That's kind of weird, right? So Somaliland's history basically is that all through the 20th century, Italy and England has been fighting for control over that region, Ethiopia in particular, which is right next to Somalia. But then after World War II, slowly they moved towards independence. And so in the 1990s, they get independence from Somalia. And then what she pulls out a little bit, that's Miriam Waba. Uh, China is already there working with the other countries, trying to establish relationships, places for military bases, etc. And so she says the United States needs to get in there, right? Because Turkey, other nations are trying to uh, gain control of that area to sort of be able to either not be victimized by what other countries do and to project power in the region. And then there's another video that I saw. It was Somaliland is not what you think, Drew Binsky. And he talked about how it was so peaceful. You can walk around any time of day. There's not a lot of crime. People are so friendly, etc. And I thought, and it reminded me of, the 80s and 90s when I went to Korea. People were kind of friendly, which is the natural reaction that people have. They're curious because now all these foreigners are there. And so you want to sort of show off your country. You want to show that, hey, we're good people here. And but once wealth starts to increase in that country, that disappears. Right, because you're like, well, who do you think you are coming to my country? The attitudes change a lot, and I see that at least in Korea. So Somaliland right now might be a really nice place to visit, but once the number of tourists go up, once the number of foreigners that want to take advantage of the region increases, then I think you'll see a lot of changes in that society. So Somaliland is independent. Oh, it was another this is another video. It's put out by Half As Interesting. I just realized what it Half As Interesting. If you read it wrong or read it differently, it might be slightly humorous. Anyway, and the title of their video was Somaliland is independent, so why does no one recognize it? And they were doing a series on micronations, uh, which I've talked about before. But tribal affiliation is really big. So a lot of Americans generally are unfamiliar with the tribal aspect of a lot of these continents, regions. So colonizers from Europe would just draw lines in the sand and say, okay, you're a country now. And those lines would frequently, divide traditionally territory that was owned by a specific tribe. And so now that tribe is in the same country as a hated tribe, a tribe that they don't get along with. Right. And so there's a lot of tension that can arise as a result. Somaliland, however, is mostly, if not all, one tribe, one family. And so they kind of get along. They formed their own militia in the 1980s. There was a civil war, and they got independence from Somalia in 1991. Uh, I used to teach about Somalia. There was an article I found, and it would talk about how Somalia, that part of Somalia, they didn't call it Somaliland, even though the article was kind of recent. It didn't refer to it as Somaliland, but rather it discussed how if people owned land, they should be able to negotiate directly with countries. But then, of course, the hurdles are, well, how does this affect other countries? And so the video that, Somaliland is independent, so why does no one recognize it? Three conditions. It goes into three conditions to be a country: clearly defined borders, independent government, and permanent population. So, and Somaliland has all three. But international recognition has been slow in coming. Larger governments in Africa don't want it to be recognized, right? And we already know that a lot of the governments in Africa are controlled by European governments, right? They're under the heavy influence. And we even saw this in uh, Burkina Faso, I think, where they kicked the French out. So it's still ongoing, where you have a lot of European influence in African countries. And so those other African governments, because under the advice of their European advisors, will not recognize Somaliland because of what it is, that it had a civil war, it became independent, it wants to be sovereign, it doesn't have that European influence. And so it's a loose cannon. You don't know what they're going to do. You can't have Africans thinking for themselves, for their own personal benefit, without enriching some European country at the same time. And so you see how Somaliland, on the one hand, is a fantastic story of self-determination, but because it's a successful story of self-determination, it's a threat to the West, right? Because in the West, you're supposed to need large government, right? You need a strong government to protect yourself, blah, blah, blah. And I got into that with the San Marino episode. And so if you have an African country that's peaceful, right, they're not committing acts of genocide and falling apart and having civil war, well, this goes against the narrative that the Africans need us, right? Because they're so stupid that they need white people to come in and tell them how to live their lives, right? And so since it goes against that narrative, you want to suppress a country like Somaliland. But look, they self-determination, right? This is great, right? They want it. And so why can't they have it? Contrast that with redistricting here in the United States. Now, redistricting is in the news because Texas is redrawing districts within Texas in such a way that it will result in the Democrats losing 5 seats in the House of Representatives in the federal government. Okay, so for some of the details, I went into this article. Texas House Republicans unveil new congressional map that looks to pick up 5 GOP seats by Gabby Birnbaum and Eleanor Klibanoff. And this is from the Texas Tribune. So they want to redraw the lines in such a way that the Democrats are not going to win seats to send representatives to Washington. Instead, they become Republican. And so I tried to find some article that would say the Democrats do it more than the Republicans, or the Republicans do it all the time. And it turns out, it seems, my superficial research, that both parties do it a lot. Okay. Uh, and it goes back a long time. More on that in a moment. But redistricting itself is required by the Constitution. So every 10 years, districts have to be redrawn within a state so that the population of each district is about the same, right? So you're going to send a representative to Washington, D.C., which means then that the districts that they represent are about equal in size, right? And so you have that situation. So everyone has to redistrict, redraw the lines to make sure that all the districts have about the same in population. But since you have to redraw the line, some people will take advantage of this and redraw the lines in such a way that it keeps the political power, who is in power at the time, it keeps them in power. Okay. And so this has been done historically to suppress black vote, but racial redistricting is illegal. Okay. And when we say racial, we're going by color-based or ethnicity-based redistricting. Okay. But as we know on this channel, any categorization is a type of racialization. And so political redistricting, according to Democrat and Republican, it's the same thing, right? So racialization based on color, illegal. Racialization based on politics, perfectly legal. So it's obviously hypocrisy. And because it's hypocritical, we have a problem. Now, redistricting is required by law. So what's gerrymandering? Jerry with a G, gerrymandering. Well, that's manipulation of voting districts for partisan reasons, right? Because of party, based on party, or racist reasons, right? Race being color. Otherwise, it's just redundant, right? If you're going to redistrict because of your political affiliation or because of the color of your skin, doesn't matter, same thing, okay? So, I mean, just go to Africa and if they do redistricting and everyone's black, well, then you're like, oh, I'm not doing it racially. But then what about tribal affiliation? You see? And that's kind of what I mean. So once you realize that any kind of categorization will create a racial category with which you then can discriminate against other people. In other words, enact and legalize injustice to your opposition. So the name gerrymandering with a G came from this guy, Elbridge Gerry, who was a governor of Massachusetts in 1812. So it goes way back, right? So even towards the beginning of this country, they've been messing with the district lines. And so he tried to redraw the districts in such a way to give Democrat Republicans, the political party, and I've talked about that in another episode, the Democrat Republicans an edge and give them power. And the lines were so, oh, I'll read it from, I forget where I got this from, but oh, it might be from the same article, might not be. I stopped citing after a bit. But gerrymandering is manipulation of voting districts for hyperpartisan or racist reasons. But the line between legit redistricting and unethical gerrymanderings is blurry at best. After all, it was the freakish shape of a Massachusetts congressional district that helped coin the term gerrymander in 1812. The long and snaking district was approved by Governor Elbridge Gerry and delivered a powerful electoral advantage to his party, the Democratic Republicans. A newspaper cartoonist noted the salamander-like shape of the district and labeled it the gerrymander after its partisan creator. Basically, it looked like a salamander, but Governor Jerry is the one that created it, and so any other manipulation of districts to give yourself a political advantage is a gerrymander, right? As opposed to a salamander. So it happens all the time. Both parties do it. Yes, it is hypocritical, but let's go a little bit deeper. So the difference for this podcast, the difference between self-determination of Somalia, right, where they redistricted themselves into a new country, right, and the gerrymandering that we see in Texas or anywhere in the United States, is that gerrymandering is a top-down denial of self-determination. What do I mean by that? Well, apparently high-speed computers now can tell politicians how people voted by neighborhood, okay? And so they know where there are more voters who will vote one way or the other. Uh, but if you take into account migration, right, within the state, most people take their politics with them, right? So some people express their opinions by their vote at the ballot box, and then others will also not only do that, but also in migrating out of a certain district, right? So if a district is changing color from blue to red or red to blue, it's a signal to the politicians that if they don't want the color to change or they want to keep changing the color, keep on doing what you're doing or do a better job, right? So one or the other. Then if you think about it too, why would a district change color from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican? It's mostly because of the local politics, right? So the local politics influence where people are going to live, and when they take their politics with them, their political affiliation, when they move out of or into a neighborhood, it changes the color of those districts, right? So basically, the federal level of redistricting is acting in reaction to the local level of politicking, okay? And then on top of everything, you have propaganda, right? So it even took me, and none of the articles I read really discussed how the local politics interacts with the federal level politics, right? That the federal redistricting is happening as a result of, or is happening as a consequence uh, of the local politics, right? So, uh, perhaps what might be better is to have honesty in politicking, right? If that was a thing. Hey, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. So maybe you don't like it, maybe you do. And ultimately, this whole process of local and federal level politicking and then the redistricting that takes place, it's basically people voting to maintain oppression and corruption in Washington, D.C. And we can see this through Trump, right? People voted one way And then Congress goes a completely different way, right? So whether you vote Democrat or Republican doesn't really matter. Your desires take are on the list of things to do because they got other things to do, right? Which supports big government like inflation, war, right? Civil unrest. These are the priorities of our federal government. And so the desires of the local community will not be heard, right? And that became really clear when Trump was elected. A lot of people I know who voted for Trump, they voted for peace. And we have yet to see even an inch move towards peace. We're not seeing it, right? And so people who get elected, they go to Washington, D.C. We're in the rearview mirror, right? We don't matter any longer until the next election rolls around. So so that's the big difference, right? One is self-determination. Somaliland says we're going to be independent. And redistricting is a top-down restructuring in order to maintain the system as it is. There's no way to change. Now, I've said it before, but the Mises Institute uh, often argue and intimate or hint at an idea of breaking up the country. Like this country is too big and too diverse to have a centralized federal government. It just doesn't make any sense. And we can see it playing out how once representatives go to Washington, D.C., the local issues don't matter any longer, right? And so what does the federal government have to do with the average everyday person living in a state? What does the East Coast have to do with the West Coast? What does the East Coast have to do with the state of Hawaii? What does Texas have to do with New Hampshire? And we can do this all day long. And why do people in the East Coast have to pay for California? Recently, I saw this video where Philadelphia spent $25 million on electric buses, which apparently didn't work. So they parked them in an empty lot and hope that everyone would forget the fact that they just wasted $25 million on this green energy idea, which didn't work out. And then recently, one of the lithium batteries caught on fire, as they are prone to do. I don't even think they were trying to recharge it. It just caught on fire. And the fire spread to all these parked buses, and a lot of them, if not all of them, burned, right, to a crisp. Now, everyone had to pay for that failed experiment, and it's no big deal, right? Which means then that the people living in that region, how do they express their dissatisfaction if not at the voting booth? So, what should really happen is permanent lines, no gerrymandering, right? No redistricting, right? You just have permanent lines, all right? Or have an independent contractor redraw the lines for you, and then allow the local government to have to be responsible for the policies that they enact on the local level, right? And then whatever happens at the local level affects then what happens on the federal level, right? But as it is, we're stuck, right? There's just the people who are corrupted, they have all of the power and they will do everything to maintain it, right? And so I close today's episode by saying, let's make secession great again, where any one of us should be able to say, I don't want it, I don't want any part of this any longer. Just IRS, take me off your mailing list. I declare my property an independent country, the way that Somaliland did it, right? And then we can just go from there. And if we did that, there would be no federal government any longer. They'd have no control over large parts of this country, except for maybe California and New York. But otherwise, the rest of us, we can just go and live in the way that we want, make the deals that we want, much like Somaliland is doing, except I would not offer the federal government to build a military base on our property. Well, that's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.